Hello, I'm Glenn W. Hunter, and this is the three C's of SEL, Community Collaboration Communication. And with us today is Gwen Washington, licensed clinical social worker. And of course, she is joining both me and Shore Denny of Community Now. And so we're going to jump right into today because there is still so much trauma that has to be managed in this current environment. Everything from schools getting ready to start to just day-to-day existing. So when you start thinking about particularly the impact that has on youth, we want to be mindful that society tends to lump together children of all ages, particularly by their technology behaviors. But Gwen, I'm going to point this one to you and your expertise. You have another point of view about their differences. Can you elaborate on the differences as you see them?
Well, yes, and what I see is like the kids that I work with, the younger children are used to, seeing, and not older children also used to seeing their peers on a regular basis, day-to-day basis. But especially with the younger kids, if they don't have a cell phone, if they didn't get their peers' phone numbers, then they've been disconnected from them over this time that they've been sheltering in place due to COVID. Some of the older kids, maybe older elementary or middle school or high school kids, may have more access to technology where maybe they're playing video games online with each other, or they can text or FaceTime with each other. But all the kids at every level don't have the same kind of access to their peers. And even those that have that access through social media still want that face-to-face contact in a lot of cases, and they haven't been able to have that. So they've been very disconnected from their peers.
Yeah. So you have this connection that's coming, and it goes from technological connectivity to personal connectivity. How are they filling the gap socially?
It's been really rough. I mean, they miss being with their friends. They miss being able to go and do things with their friends, whether it's like I've had kids where maybe school and the educational part of it was a challenge, but they really miss the social interaction with their friends, playing on the playground, maybe meeting them at the park, going bike riding together. Even with the older students, they want to still see their friends face to face, but going to a movie or getting together at someone's house just isn't happening. So they're having a really difficult time filling in those gaps. And sometimes I hear from parents, okay, now my child thinks that I'm their confidant. Instead of having that conversation on the playground with their buddy, Jimmy or Malik, maybe they're, trying to ask me about, what's the latest thing that's happened with the Marvel comics or the DC comics. And I don't know anything about that stuff. And so then my child feels like I'm not attuned to them or listening to them, and they feel dismissed. And so it's really hard for parents who are now trying to manage that, but their kids are really missing out on that social interaction that they've had with their peers, and it's hard for parents to replace that.
Oh. Sure, with the school year coming up and the fact you're going to be in school buildings, how does that play out for you as you're preparing the programming you'll be having for our youth?
Well, nothing is happening on site, right? Everything is going to be virtual. Exactly to Gwen's point, there's going to be no real connection. Some schools are looking at a hybrid program where they have half the population coming on one day and half the other, something like that. They're kind of staggering the youth. Thank God those youth are going to have a bit of interaction. But what we see is that they actually are not. Their desks, I think, are going to have plastic around them, or
Yep.
so there's not going to be that connection, that physical connection. They'll be able to go somewhere, but I'm very concerned about our youth and their mental state, right? It's been 6 months, I think, and a lot of them have been without this contact, right? A lot of them who maybe have one single parent at home, who might be one of those needed people, needed responders, someone that has to go to work right now, and that youth is sitting there at home, or with some extended family, or with when you go into the generations, they're there with grandma, right? You got an elementary, you're there with grandma all day. There's a lot of mental stress and a lot of things that we are not even seeing yet, that I'm hesitant to say that when they hit that school campus, these kids are going to go crazy. They are going to feel a release, a euphoria of reconnection. And I think that we're going to see this for a while. I'm hoping that the schools are going to be bringing in trauma-informed practices, more social emotional learning techniques, that the teachers are going to be trained in social emotional activities and techniques and strategies that can be used with our youth to try to overcome this barrier, because I think it's going to be very severe. The lack of human contact is very severe to the mental state of a person, especially a child. Gwen, you were talking about some of your youth that you used to give a hug, right?
I would have children who would come in to see me in the office and they would greet me with a hug. And they're not able to do that anymore. Or even for a peer, a high five or daps or whatever, they're not going to be able to have that kind of physical contact. And so it's trying, to have to sit far apart in the classroom with plastic barriers, not be able to have, that close contact even with their teachers. How will they do lunch? How will they spend playground time? It's a lot for them to manage when they've already been disconnected from those peers for so many months already.
Right.
Wow. I think there's another component to that as well, as they're trying to navigate just how to interact in this environment with barriers. But I think it goes back to a point you brought up, Shore, about the multi-generational component. They've spent more time, in many cases, with grandma or their great uncle or someone else in the family that isn't a direct parent. And that's something that is distinct about the Inland Empire, where there is a lot of multi-generational families. How do they manage that trauma as they re-enter this classroom that I just spent 4 months with a family member I'm not used to engaging that much?
I mean, Gwen, help me here. I think that more what we need to know is, what do we do to help these youth? Even right now, what can we do? Is there something that we can tell the adults, or do we get do we import friends? I used to import friends for my daughter. I hate to say this my daughter was the only child. So when we went places, and she didn't really have a lot of friends. So we'd have to find somebody to take with her, right? So I would import kids to go with us, to go to events, or to be there with my daughter. I'm wondering if we need like a buddy system. I don't know, what could we do?
And I think maybe having something like that where that's incorporated, whether you bring someone along. I go back to the question about intergenerational. There are different parenting techniques in those intergenerations. So a person who's a grandparent has very different parenting techniques than that parent for that child. And maybe that grandparent grew up in the era of seeing the children should be seen and not heard, versus a parent who is more open to open communication, negotiation with the child, and just having that conflict where they're all around each other on a regular basis every day, and just trying to manage those differences in terms of parenting styles, values, sometimes expectations. And that can be very, very challenging. Parents caught in the middle, their parents and their children sometimes, or vice versa. And it takes a lot to manage just with the two generations, let alone another generation, and being together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's a challenge to anyone. And so I think one of the things that I would say is more family meetings, and addressing and talking openly about those issues and how things are going to be handled, issues will be handled, and looking on coming to an agreement on some of those things and getting people to commit to those agreements. But when you talk about multi-generations in a household, it's a challenge at times, especially given the amount of time everyone is spending together. And then I heard Lynn, you mentioned about, and Shore, you mentioned about first responders being at work, and then grandparents being there watching kids. I think about the parents who are working from home and trying to set aside that workspace and children are fighting in the background. Or, Mom, what about this? Dad, what about this? And they're having to manage work, their parents, their children, and getting the household to kind of work together a little better all at one time. And that's a huge task to take on.
Do you think that that needs to be a family therapy right there? That sounds like family therapy to me.
I do think there needs to be. You know, I've heard some situations where especially sometimes in blended families, where there's some challenges with those step parents and stepchildren. And I'm right now, I wish I could find a group for fathers and sons to work on some of those things. And there's multiple issues, family issues, and again, when you add in those different generations, I think family sessions would be good, family meetings would be good, groups, even if they have to be virtual for now, to help with navigating through those new challenges or compounded challenges that we have to deal with.
Wow. No, it's bad enough when you think about our youth just dealing with each other, having peer-to-peer friction as they're trying to navigate through relationships. And now you pointed out different facets of what happens when you have multiple generations in a family and trying to monitor those relationships or manage those relationships in a way the children can understand. But as we're focusing on the children with all these moving adult parts, what has changed since the pandemic with how children interact with parents that are now stressed out at a much higher level?
Oh gosh, there's so many layers of that. Like with kids not necessarily having the same contact that they have with their peers and parents trying to fill in, you know, some of that social time of just talking about different things that their kids are into or their kids are enjoying. But one of the things about that concerns me is also the parents who are really, really stressed and what that means about what their interaction is like with their children. So are their tempers shorter? Are they more verbally aggressive? Are they more physically aggressive? I know I was hearing that, you know, child abuse reports are down, but I don't think that's for a good reason. I think that there are fewer eyes on these kids, sets of eyes watching and looking out for their well-being. And so there's some stressors that are being further exacerbated that were already there, and some that might not have been there to that degree that are being heightened because of being in close quarters with everybody.
That's really can be explosive too in a family, right? Just a few scenarios. One of, you know, you have a family member, two family parents at home, one works, one doesn't, right? But they both work, but one's now home. And the stressors on that parent that's at home, you know, and having to deal with the kids and the lack of finances when they're not usually the one dealing with that, or, you know, and who's going to drive to the school to get the free lunch today, or you know, how is that going to be navigated? You know, all of those things put such a stress on that adult that I'm not saying that, you know, I'm just saying I think it's very prevalent that we have stress in the homes, overbearing stress in the homes on both parents. But just think of that one parent that now decides that, oh, I'm going to cope in a negative way, right? And they're going to start drinking, or they're going to cope by, you know, what you're saying, you know, anger, or you know, whatever it is. We can't leave the house, so it's not going to be gambling or anything at this point, right? That think of the person who has that gambling addiction, who is now not able to, that's at home with the kids. And I mean, it gets so convoluted, you know. I mean, the issues continue to just stack on top of each other in one household, that you've got to deal with all of that. What if the relationship between the parents was strained before COVID, right? And now they're spending how many hours quarantined together, you know, and neither one of them are working. And, you know, I think the dynamics here for the family are staggering. I think that it's so negative that we need to look at how we can support our families and how, I mean, how do we move forward? We're kind of stuck here. I kind of feel like time has stopped. I mean, we're stuck here. How do we move our minds and everything forward?
Any thoughts on that one, Gwen? Because I think those are a number of riveting questions.
I think about that, and I think how can we pull in, as we say, our village to help? Like I think about parents this way. I think about those actions where they're spinning plates, and parents are spinning so many plates. You know, got to cook dinner, got to do homework with kids, got to teach the lesson to kids, got to do their homework, got to keep the house clean, got to make sure they're getting along. And it's hard to keep all those plates spinning. So how can we all support each other? Well, maybe I've got a friend who's really good with math and science, and maybe they can work on that while I'm working on English and social studies with this other child. Or maybe there is a teenager who has been really, really safe that I can bring into my household to do some things with my kids. I think that we're going to have to look at how we as a community can be supportive of each other and maybe managing some of those tasks and working on how we can work on families where maybe there was an issue of domestic violence, and how do we address that so we can help reduce the stress in that household? What programs, what are possibilities for kids so that they can somehow get a safe break and parents can get a safe break? Because it is a lot when they don't have that time away from each other at all. And I'm just wondering what we can do as a community to provide support from the therapeutic community, from the coaching community, from the tutoring community, to help relieve some of the stress that's in that household possibly.
And isn't that kind of hard right now? Because like I think we kind of talked before, everything's virtual. So, I mean, it gets to a point, I mean, people are sick. They're sick of webinars. They're sick of being in front of the computer, sick of, anything, So even for our children, this distance learning and like going to therapy online and then going to whatever else is online and talking to their friends online and then playing games online. And then, I mean, oh my gosh, I see an overload, just a complete overload.
And I do believe that's true. I wonder if there are ways that we can do it in a slightly different way and still be safe, because I do think people are over the whole virtual thing. I mean, in snippets, it's fine, but when it's everything repeatedly, all the time, it is really, really hard. I see that with the kids that I work with. They were really excited at first, and now it's like, are we done yet? Are we done yet? They're really over it, and they're over it with the distance learning too. So if there's a way that we can figure out, I don't know if there's like open areas where we can sit and we can social distance and provide some assistance or support. I'm not sure what it will be, but it really does involve everybody putting their heads together and thinking of some alternatives.
I think that, there's this concept that the kids are going to be in, areas, and we're going to have more structure, and we're going to have to create almost programmatic solutions for them. But I think there also has to be room for freedom of expression. Kids need to get out and express themselves both physically, verbally, and frankly, intellectually, just in space. I don't know what the path is, but I think that is something that needs to be incorporated into the thinking for their development. Comments, ladies?
We're setting up a virtual program for elementary right now. And it's called edutainment, right? Because how in the world are we going to keep the focus of these youth and provide them with a lesson? I just have to say my hearts are out to the teachers. But I think that what we need to do is just try to create programming that has layers to it, different dynamics, and get into entertainment with our education. We've known for years and years and years that if you put a rhyme to something that, it's easier to get it. Yeah, Schoolhouse Rock, I still, conjunction, junction, what's your function? I mean, we can still go through, and it's still a little rhyme in my head. So maybe this is something that we can look at as we kind of all felt that the school system was antiquated, that, that it needed a bit of a reform or adjustment. So maybe this is the time. Maybe we can now start utilizing the virtual platform in a more engaging way. But that being said, we definitely need those pods. We need these groups of children and adults to be able to come together. And truthfully, we need touching. So we are going to have to find a way to allow our kids, and it's not going to matter with our elementaries, they're going to do it. I don't see how you're going to stop these children from running up and hugging each other and saying, oh, Dad, I'm so glad to see you, you know, and all of that. So we just need to be prepared. And from what they're saying, it's not being prepared for really our youth getting sick, but them bringing it back to the generations at home. So we go back to that intergenerational concept, and how do we do this moving forward? Because is this our new normal?
I think that's a really good question. Is it our new normal? And I do get concerned about whether or not they're going to bring something back to other generations in their homes, but I also get concerned about the fact that they've been out of school for so long. We don't know what to expect in terms of transmission when they're back in a school environment. And so there are just so many unknowns to try and figure out. And I don't know that anyone has the answers right now.
Oh, I don't think so. And that's why everyone, again, our stress levels are so high, right? Just think of the parents who are trying to make the decision, do I let my kid go back or stay home, right? For the ones that have the choice, right? I mean, just think of the other side of that, the parent that knows their kid's not going back, and they got to deal with, you know, the distance learning, and the fact that, like you said, they've got to be everything for the child now, right? Not just the mom. You know, I told my daughter, I'm the mama, right? One time she was like 8 or something, and she said, you're not my friend. And I looked at her and laughed. I said, you're right. I'm your mama, right? So now we can't really say that, because we now are their friends right now. You know, we've got to morph and become things that we're not. And I think that's what the parents right now are dealing with. And did they even have a summer? Some parents I know, their kids were in school through the summer, you know, most of this June, and maybe they're out in July. But what do we think of, if this is the normal? What could we conceive would be breaks for our parents, especially when they work at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got my office right here, and I live in a 2-bedroom apartment, right? Here's my office, or 1-bedroom. Here's my office. There's my kid's bed. There's the kitchen, right? All entertainment's done right there, and I have to get my work done. How do we continue this, is where I'm going. I mean, we all know this is the current situation, but how long can this last? How do we come up with innovation here?
And I think that's such an amazing question. And the problem is that we're still working on trying to even begin to figure out answers to that. So it's like, amazing question. Now we begin to think about how will we handle this moving forward. And it's tough to kind of think outside the box and think about how we're going to do this and what would be a healthy way and a safe way to do that. So I do think we need to figure out ways for people to have breaks. Parents, children, yes.
You know, we could do the pod, right, Glenn? We had talked about having in the neighborhoods one house where the kids go to school, right? You know, you get up to 10 kids in that pod, and that way they can interact together. There's one teacher that's there that's overseeing their online education, you know, to make sure that their time management is there. And that gives the parents at home a break and a way to have a work day, you know. I think it's something that we could easily do within our neighborhoods if we work together. I don't know. I mean, right now, as you said earlier, it's like, oh, it's not going to last long, right? In March, we were like, oh, we'll be back in May. And in May, I was like, oh, okay, well, June. Okay, well, so since we keep, you know, we're not making plans for the future because we continue to think it's going to, our lives as they were will come back. But every time we see it's not. So I think that we do need to take the next step, which is setting up those pods. What parents are going to raise their hands and say, you know what, I'm a stay-at-home parent anyway. Bring 3 kids over. You know, you guys have to, you know, we are going to now be responsible for each other's households. You can't, you know, y'all ain't going out to the beach without a mask, right? You know, I mean, really, we're going to have to start making these agreements and coming together as a community to be able to get through this. And to me, that is trauma-informed, safe-bearing wellness right there. That's the way that we do it. When we're talking about how do you conceptualize it, I think that's the key.
You know, I think we've talked about that on different, in different shows, different venues, and the consistency of it, I think, remains that that is a viable solution. You know, and we'll see how it manifests itself as ideas are being bounced around in various communities. But I don't think it behooves any of us to move too far away from that possibility, because we are, as people, we're connectors. We need the human condition. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, it doesn't matter. That sense of connectivity, of awareness of another human being nearby, actually feeds us psychologically.
Yes.
But as goodness, we just continue to go down more and more fascinating rabbit trails. Parting shots. Parting shots. One last question. You know, one key to facilitating our kids reestablishing a new normal. What would be that one key to facilitate our kids as they reestablish a new normal? Because we can't go back.
I think we have to really sit down and begin to brainstorm the possibilities. What else can we do? How else can we manage this? Looking at new, I like the pod idea that Shore just mentioned. What other avenues do we have? What are the other possibilities? And it's time to really brainstorm and figure out other ways that we hadn't considered before. Maybe we need to explore those options now and be open to those possibilities.
Yeah.
Indeed.
I think that, unfortunately, that the way this is going, everybody's going to get this, right? I mean, right now, the way we see it, the hospitals are saying we're being shuttered and shut down so that we don't overwhelm our hospital system and our emergency system. But from what they're saying, it seems like as time goes on, this is going to be something like the flu, where, you know, you can get it each year, you know, when it comes through, watch out. Not saying that the devastation will be as I'm not trying to downplay. I'm just trying to say, I think this is something that's going to keep coming back. So I think that we need to look at answers. We need to stop being on pause. I think that we need to look at, in a optimistic way, what is our future right now? Innovation. When sci-fi, I look at sci-fi all the time. I'm old, so I'll say it. I watched the Jetsons, and I watched, you know, I love, you know, Lost in Space and all of that stuff. I remember things, and now I have them. Now I have a phone I can put in my ear, right? Everything from those sci-fi movies is now here. There are sci-fi movies where we see youth, all kinds of youth, in virtual learning environments, right? This is in movies. It's already there. It's already been conceived. I think we simply need to put some of these ideas into play on how we can. I'm going to say this, and I hope, I'm sorry to all of my school administrators and all of that, but maybe we need to look at public education in a whole new way and look at how we can break it down. All of these years we've been breaking it up, right? You know, building it up, large school sites, and, you know, bringing all of the groups together. In the past, we didn't. In the past, it was a little schoolhouse here in the neighborhood, a little schoolhouse there in the neighborhood. Maybe we need to go back in that type of thinking, because we have so many people in this world, and minimize the exposure by, again, having little pods of education throughout our communities rather than one huge one. And we could do that. And as time goes on, if we get well, when this thing ends, we can have large graduations for those groups. You know, have them all have their year-end party at some, you know, local venue, you know, that way we can bring those groups together. As we go on, those little pods, they can do the swimming tournaments, right? I mean, everything can go almost back, but do they need to be 1,000 youth in one place? I think is what we're going to come down to. Do we need to have such large groups for education when we have so many educators and can, you know, get educated?
I tell you, there's a lot of moving parts to those solutions, and somewhere beneath all that is going to be the one we adopt. I think it's amazing that we're able to bring bright minds to hard problems, and particularly when it concerns our youth, and trying to make sure they're prepared to keep our community moving forward. So again, reach out to us, contact us, let us know your thoughts on how our programming, not just the podcast, but as we're literally getting our hands dirty in the community, working with young people and helping them cope with the different stresses and trauma. Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, Shore. But make sure that there's a dialogue so that we're doing the best we can to improve the situation. And we want to ask all our viewers to make sure that you're being involved in your community, your school systems, with your youth, that you're implementing the best solutions that we're able to help provide or at least facilitate. But for now, on behalf of Gwen Washington, our new guest, thank you, Gwen. And of course, Shore Denny, we have to challenge you all to, at all times, be safe.
I want to say that this podcast was sponsored by Community Now. And if you would like to sponsor a podcast, then we'd love for you to do that. Reach out to communitynow.info at the website, or plug in at Community Now website and sponsor one of our podcasts. Get in the conversation.